folks, and welcome to episode 43 of the Modern Agile Show. I am thrilled to have my friend Maaret Pyhäjärvi from Finland here today. She's a lead engineer with F-Secure. She's an Agile practitioner. She's a prolific blogger. She's written 3 books, one called The Strong Style Pair Programming, another one, the Mob Programming Guidebook, and her latest exploratory testing, which is on LeanPub. Welcome, Maaret.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Yeah, glad you could take some time, and really excited for you to share so much of the awesome things you've been doing, especially at your gig right now at F-Secure. So let's get into it.
All right, where do you want to start?
Well, tell us a little bit about the culture there. What is it like at F-Secure? How have you found it to be and maybe shaped it yourself?
I'm now second-time F-Secure employee. I was there about 12 years ago, something of that sort. And we were just starting Agile back in those days when I was there last time. And now that I came back, I kind of had the ideas that some things have maybe evolved and changed, and definitely they had. What maybe defines the culture nowadays is we don't really talk about Agile much. We almost treat it as it's a word we want to avoid. No one speaks that we avoid it either, but it's probably related to the fact that a lot of the Agile coaches left the company in one of the collaboration negotiations some years ago. So we really don't have any coaches, but we have people whose personalities are kind of coach-like, who are bringing this Teal type of environment into the organization.
And for those who don't know Teal, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's the kind of the self-organized way of looking at things, where there's a lot of power in the individuals who are doing the work, rather than an assumed command line on how things are going. So there's a lot of focus on collaboration and making sure that each of the developers, basically, who will be doing the hands-on work, will have as much of good information as they can, because that's where the rubber kind of meets the road. Some millions of users will see their results, and if they don't know something, even if the product owners knew that, then it doesn't really change the user's experience. So we are kind of like looking at this as a very developer-centric environment.
And F-Secure makes antivirus software and other security things in the software field. Right?
Yeah, that's what we do. So I'm working personally on the Windows endpoint protection side. So antivirus, anti-malware, like we usually call it, software updating, kind of patches, all that sort of stuff. So trying to keep a Windows machine safe.
I see. Okay, that's important, very important to do. So the culture there, tell us a little bit about that. It's experimentation. What's the story in terms of like how open are people to experimenting there?
So generally people are very nice in wanting to try new things, but there's a lot of team specific differences. So we have a lot of liberty of organizing things as we want in a particular team. And my team has been about 12 people all of this time. And for experimentation, we've been maybe a bit of the forerunners on that side. So I've talked about this idea that we've been trying, for example, no product owner experiment, which is one of my favorite stories always to tell.
Oh yeah, well, please tell that. How did that come to be?
So about 3 years ago, I realized that when we were all sitting in that one room together, we had a product owner there in the room, and a lot of times it happened that the developers somehow went and discussed with the product owner all of the things they achieved, and kind of like if they needed to brag on something going forward, they went to the product owner. And as a tester in the team, I was feeling kind of sidelined, and the product owner was way too busy always to tell anything to me on like kind of what kind of summary they had. So I was kind of struggling to get some of that information. So at first I had this kind of an idea from a lot of the experiments that other people have done, that what if we just physically move the product owner out? And I went to the product owner's manager And I asked, like, could we try this just, for a few months? Like, let's see if the dynamic changes that way. But I also had this idea. I had read your article. I really love the article that you've written about the idea of no product owner. So I had read that. So as soon as we started seeing a lot better collaboration, because we had to talk to one another, but we still were working with the product owner who was one floor away. So we didn't send him far away. Then I started kind of like introducing to the team and the product owner this idea that maybe we could experiment with, this thing, the no product owner. And we had a workshop where we basically, we took some books on Agile and listed kind of all the things the product owner should be doing. And like we had long list of things that a product owner should be doing. And we agreed that, okay, so all of this, the team will do. Mm-hmm. If there's no product owner, this is now our responsibility. And it made it kind of concrete in that sense.
Yes.
And from that list on, what we basically did is for 3 months, we started doing that. And it was almost as if you let the developers of handcuffs, they were producing on that 3-month time frame we were measuring almost 4 times as much as ever before. Mm-hmm. They solved some problems that we hadn't managed to solve in years. And as a product company, you would imagine we would want to have telemetry and kind of like data-driven stuff available in our teams. But that was the day one thing that we implemented when we no longer had to wait for someone else to prioritize it. We were like, no, we can't do things without data. Let's put data in place. Mm-hmm. So after the 3 months, we had kind of like a retrospective on how did this whole experiment go. Mm-hmm. And we concluded that nothing changed. That was the first kind of high level. And then when we discussed more the idea of what the product owner, the previous product owner, we called them, well, we first called them PMS, product management specialist, but they didn't like that term. I wonder why. So PME, product management expert, was what we were then using. They went kind of fishing with the customers, kind of meeting them, having meetings, and they would bring back fish for us if they had any. And for the 3 months, they had nothing to bring home for us. So no meals cooked if we would rely on them. And it seems like as a group, we were much more effective on kind of collecting the high level items, or like important items that we needed to work on. So we turned it into a way of working, and we've been doing that for over 2 years now.
Wow, amazing. And how do you get, any kind of direction from the business about what's important, or how does that work?
So I've been trying to explain the way we work a lot recently. And I recently learned about this idea of flight levels that actually helps explain some of this stuff. So first of all, kind of like I could explain all the nitty gritty of how Kanban and meetings and all of that work for us. But that's kind of what every other team is doing as well. Mm-hmm. The other flight levels are how across team collaboration works. So for us, it's really being organized as a network of connections. So even the 15-year-old in our team had specific names they were supposed to talk regularly to and bring back fish home. So everyone had this kind of like, we had a really wide network. We talked to hundreds of people around the company because 12 people, everyone having their own connections and bringing back the news to the team. It's like intelligence service at its best. Mm. And then the third flight level is the management. So that is still something that we're mostly trying to develop. So we have really good guidance on kind of how are we trying to guide our business, and we listen to them very carefully. Yeah. But it still feels a little bit too much of a one-way street. So mm-hmm. we do talk back and forth on that.
Right.
But it's more like listening carefully and trying to translate that into something actionable on our side, yeah. rather than a really the best possible collaboration. But it's been evolving a lot.
I see. So in fact, I think you mentioned that your developers sometimes come up with features and that were not asked for, but they see the need for it and are able to then put that into the product?
Yeah, so we've had, again, security is something where developers typically care a lot about that. Yes. And it can even be domain experts on how do you keep your Windows machine secure. And when they see these kind of opportunities, when they now need to kind of reflect in the scale of what are all the important things, and they get to make those choices themselves. Yeah. They've created features we didn't even think that we could have in the product.
Wow.
Because we thought there was no space for those. And it's kind of magical how sometimes things happen so that we've we've had like an afternoon, like Friday afternoon seating in the office space while we were still allowed to be in the office. So we were sitting in the sofas and someone would come and talk about some problem. And on Monday at 11, it's already ready to go to production. It's like, how did you do this? So the superpower of like having an actual feature team, where for us it means that we have to work across 3 different technical stacks. It's been almost magical.
Wow, that's awesome. So it seems like these experiments have been working very successfully.
Some of them work better than others. So again, sometimes you try things and you tweak it a little bit, and it doesn't work out quite so well. It seems like all the big ones, like the no product owner and no Jira and no estimates, all the big no's, those have been working really nicely. And also what's been working really nicely is the whole idea of shortening the release cycles. When we are delivering for a couple of millions of end point computers, it means quite a number of installations and downloads, and it doesn't feel easy to do that continuously. So we have moved from the usual every 6 months schedule to every 2-week schedule. And I think that's kind of where we can be and where we can get with these type of products. And then smaller fixes we can do within the day. So I'm usually very happy to see us fixing something within a 4-hour period.
And so do you work in continuous flow kind of fashion? I mean, do you have sprints, or do you have more of a continuous flow?
So since the overall product that the customer experiences is multiple different products coming from different teams, we still have this 2-week synchronization cycle. That kind of reminds a sprint, but the only thing that is sprint-like in that is that we do a demo of whatever we have by the end of that 2-week period.
Okay.
And otherwise, it's more of a continuous flow. So whenever things are ready, we don't want to keep them on the shelf waiting. And that's also kind of how we got to the end-to-end implementation of features, having open source community internally, and making sure that we can just commit our own or make our own pull requests and make changes in other teams' working areas if we needed support for something. Because, well, if you don't do that, we ended up having, at some point, we had a queue of 22 items within a few months, waiting for some other team to make them visible on their part. And then we just decided that maybe it was smarter to not create that queue and spend some more time on just doing the work that they put into the queue.
So it sounds like collective code ownership to me, like the whole, you all have an arrangement where it's okay to change code regardless of the team, provided you follow certain rules or conventions.
Yeah. And the rules are a little different for different teams. So sometimes we have this we think of it as a code guardian, someone who watches over what gets into that space. And it's really strict on some areas where it almost feels difficult or next to impossible to do those changes. And it's a lot more kind of like driven towards enabling change in others. So overall, we're still working on that culture of how do we share that code so that it serves our business best.
Wonderful. So it's not strictly strong style pairing or mob programming that you're doing. It's more of this open source style. Can you say more about that?
So I'm a big fan generally of the whole pairing and mobbing, and I find myself spending a lot of my evenings working on those styles with people all around the world. But when I go to office, people do not want to pair. I take a picture every time they pair, and that hasn't been many times. And for mobbing, what we do is mob testing, because that's kind of my specialty. So when some major features are getting ready, I definitely get people together and have like a shared experience of what annoys us on that. So that it kind of amplifies people's voices a lot in that sense. So the way of working is a lot more on having a one-on-one discussion with people who are local to that code base, saying what you're intending to do, then just doing it, and working through the feedback that you get for pull requests.
I
But the
see.
pull requests are so small that there's a lot of them flying around. It's actually really difficult to follow all the changes going on.
Mhm.
I always do this like a reflection of the last year in the end of the year. So when the year changes, I look at how much of things we're doing. And we had 44 people contributing just on the middle part, which is our team's responsibility.
I see.
So there's a lot of people, multiple teams contributing to that same code base. So there needs to be this general idea of wanting to allow change.
I see. That sounds really good. Is there, so that means that people are working solo on code, but going through a review process.
Yes.
And so does that handle some of the knowledge transfer issues that we often find in companies where, you never ever want to have one person be the only person that knows a certain area of the code and no one else knows it? That's risky. So how does that get managed?
So some of it gets managed by the fact that people are reading those pull requests and following whatever is going on. And there's a lot of kind of like, there's a routine on how people look at things, even if they weren't the official reviewers or volunteering as the reviewers.
Yes.
But more of it I find is addressed through the idea that on the team level, we talk about this a lot, that we do not want that to happen, that there's only one person who knows a component, even if the code exists and we could read it. Like, we don't want to be in a place where there's only one person who knows how and why it's been created.
Yeah.
So we generally talk about this idea of having already kind of like a buddy that you work with, the second pair of eyes, who is kind of preparing to be someone else on that. And across business lines, because we share a platform across multiple business lines to create these antivirus products, we have a person for every component on every business line that is using it. So that's been also kind of like a cross-team effort to make sure that we make space for that learning. Yeah. And it usually means just taking a feature and taking whatever time you need to contribute to it, the existing code base. And that's how you learn. You don't remember by reading, you remember by doing.
Right. Okay. So that's being effectively managed. And do you produce a lot of automated tests or perform TDD or things like that? Or is that more whatever kind of automated testing it happens how it happens? Like,
so for us, we run about 300,000 tests just for my team every single day.
Wow.
So a lot of automation does happen. And it's a little hard sometimes to explain why there's so much of it. But when we have all the Windows operating systems and flavors and the number of changes and all of that combined, there's really quite a system to run. I think I was looking at it at some point. I think we spawned 14,000 new virtual machines. It was on a daily basis, yes, because that was the number that I was looking at. So on one virtual machine, we run quite a number of tests still. And also unit testing, we don't do TDD. Like, I found in the whole organization, because I've been looking, I love that stuff myself, and I would love to see us do more of it. But on the whole organization, I've seen I found two people who are doing TDD and are proud of TDD doing. And now one of my team members is like the latest feature, after I had been, talking about this forever. He's now doing a rewrite, and he's doing that TDD style. So I'm looking forward to discussions on whether that would be, more widely applicable. So I'm really happy on people taking that stretch and trying things that they're convinced that they don't want to do. So that happens a lot for us.
That's great. That's really great. So you mentioned at some point that all the Scrum Masters went away, got fired or whatever.
So there was resizing of the organization, and that was one group of people that got let go pretty much consistently.
And what did that do to the company? How did that change the company?
On the day when that happened, I wasn't at the company, so that was kind of between my two cycles of being there. But what I think it mostly did, looking at it kind of like in hindsight and afterwards, is that no one volunteers to officially be in that role. So nowadays, I just found one person who is, again, an Agile coach,
Mhm.
in our newer parts of organization who don't maybe bear the wounds of remembering this. But mostly people don't call themselves agile coaches or scrum masters.
Mhm.
But it's also created this culture where you can expect that anyone or everyone is kind of like a contributor and a coach in one package.
Mhm.
So if you're interested in helping others learn and grow, you're quite free to do that. So there's no one telling you you have to do it, but there's no one stopping you either.
I see. That's great. So so not only did the product owner role start to get distributed to the whole team, but the Scrum Master or coaching role also was distributed at the company.
And that's a really difficult one, kind of like getting that distributed. So
Mm.
when you have senior people, then it's usually a little easier. But especially when you get new people outside the company who are very used to having those roles around, they
Mhm.
start very quickly looking for the person doing this stuff specifically,
Right.
rather than enabling the whole team to carry that thing.
Mhm. Yeah. So really excellent stuff there. So it sounds like it's you know, well, I might even say modern agile, because it's you have a modern implementation of agility that you're finding works a lot better than maybe the older ways.
I would definitely think of it as something that fits the modern agile principles at least quite nicely.
Hmm.
I have the sticker on my board, on my desk at office. So right now it's still at the desk
Hmm.
with me not being there. But and I sometimes, yeah, I sometimes show that to people. That whole making people awesome is kind of like my guideline on how I like to do things.
Yeah.
And all the other ones, they also like, they really speak of the stuff that matters more also to the management side,
Hmm.
and not just for the developers. So I find that there's been a lot of good stuff that I have found through kind of identifying with that stuff.
I see. Yeah. So, and have others in the company resonated with it then, these four principles?
Definitely. I've been sharing articles on modern agile and kind of like
Yeah.
videos, and I've been doing presentations on this internally as well.
Mm.
And it seems to be a little easier to take in than the agile principles, who nowadays feel a little bit disconnected.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 It's, I think anytime we make a sort of agile formula or any kind of thing like that, it's always going to fail to some extent. It really is just an adjective, agile. It means, the ability to move with quick, easy grace, or this having a character that is both quick, resourceful, and adaptable. Those are things that are universal to agility. And if you can get closer and closer and closer to that and be inspired towards, you know, living that adjective, I think that's amazing. And as you said earlier, through the sort of culture of experimentation, you've been trying all kinds of things to make it fit your culture. It sounds like, people don't like to pair program or necessarily, get together in a mob, but you've adapted and been resourceful and found ways to leverage other models like the open source model and various things like that. So yeah, it sounds wonderful. I think it's a great example of true agility without a name. It doesn't have to have a named framework for it to be effective.
So when I wrote a blog post about this, kind of like the idea that we are doing developer-centric software development, where we really put the developer and the developer's knowledge in the center. I remember one of the ladies in the networks sending me a ping saying, "Did you notice what JB Rainsberger just shared on LinkedIn?" And he shared my article that was like, warmed my heart. He shared my article with the title "Agile as if you meant it." So I thought that was a lovely way of kind of like saying that
Right.
that what I was describing was something that he would also recognize as I'd like to see more of this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. It's really nice. I think product managers might be a little concerned because in your context, of building security software, it is a very developer-centric thing anyway. In some contexts, some other contexts, it seems sometimes teams are optimized for delivery, and not enough discovery. Like, what does our customer really want? a lot of people are saying this message. I just spoke with Ellen Gottessteiner, and we were talking all about the need of teams to spend more time on discovery and not just delivery. So, can you say a little more about that and your thoughts?
So generally, I frame that around the idea of learning, that you need the actionable learning where it will really matter.
Yeah.
But then again, that's kind of the most important problem that we have to solve on what the customers really want.
Right.
And when we count them in the millions and we count our partners in thousands, and they are really globally distributed, I would be a fool to say that a 12-person team alone does all of this.
Right.
We have the product owner organization, who are still kind of trying to understand and bring bits and pieces and participate in various discussions. We have the support organization who get contacted whenever something isn't quite right. And we have the sales organization where they're basically facing the customers every single day. And I think the best thing coming out of this is the idea that instead of this information from various sources being filtered through the product management back to the team, it now comes to the team. If we need help filtering, we know that the product owner organization is always willing to help us with that. But if we don't, we can turn it into code right away, because if we can do something with those ideas, it's really valuable.
Right.
And we can always keep them up to date on what we are delivering and what kind of things we have heard. So in case they wanted to correct us on the priorities, they would have a chance of doing that. But so far, there hasn't been much of a need of correcting us. And I think overall, in the 2 years when we've been doing this, the collaboration with those people who are really facing the customer and facing kind of all the, again, we're a fairly large organization nowadays with, again, over 1,000 people.
Yeah.
So someone needs to talk to all of those people and somehow collect that and keep everyone updated. And a team of 12, especially a DevOps team that does all the monitoring and support stuff, also in that single team of 12 people, and runs 300,000 test cases and analyzes all the failures and does features in scale that is unprecedented. Of course, you need the supporting organization around you. So it's more like this whole no product owner is a way of framing that this work is just way too important to be given to a single person, and rather that single person can just, watch over and look how things are evolving.
Right, yeah. And you do have an organization devoted to product management. I mean, it sounds like there's a product management organization. You called it a product owner organization?
It's a product management organization that we have.
Yeah. So that remains a very important activity in building successful products. And it's just, I think, as you're saying, you don't want it all to go through a single person. Rather, it's much better to distribute the thought of how do we make people awesome with our product, right?
And also, it's really important to get it to the developer's language. Like, they need to understand what the customer's pain and problem was. And if it gets filtered, there's a lot of energy going into refiltering or like addressing the filtering, whether the filter was actually useful or whether it was breaking the message.
Right.
So we found that it was a lot easier to trust the source when the source was direct and kind of like shared for all of us than if it was filtered. So there were so many, let's say, scars from past where the filtered information actually didn't produce the right outcome. Yeah. And we felt we wanted to have our own say into that. And we wanted to make sure that we could look at the telemetry and make sure that the users are actually doing the things we are claiming they would do when given this feature.
And is the business happy with the team?
So I've been kind of using as a measure, this idea that when we have organizational changes, do we get to continue the way we were doing things before? And we had one just 6 months ago, and there was a lot of discussion on like, do we now need to have a product owner? It was probably one of the most common discussions back in those days. And we could still continue without a product owner. And the discussion kind of went in the way that they don't really quite always understand what we're doing and how we are so successful in delivering. But whatever we are doing, let's not break it.
Right.
So I think overall, with that kind of show of trust on having that discussion in the organization, the general relationship has even further improved on making sure that they have the information they need and kind of them passing us the relevant contacts rather than the filtered information.
Wonderful, wonderful story. Well, I really appreciate you stopping by on the show and sharing your wisdom and the amazing things your team is doing. I think it's really cool, innovative work, and it's wonderful for people to become aware of alternative ways that teams are being agile. So I really appreciate you coming. Thanks again. And if people want to find your books, what's the best place for them to go?
So if they just Google me by my first name, they find two Maarets. One of them is a sexual therapist. That's not me, and I'm the second one. So just look for Maaret, Maaret, and that's the easiest way to find me.
Okay, and I'll put some links in the show notes, and we'll get some attention to the great work you're doing. I think it's fantastic. You're extremely unique in that you're looking at many aspects of the teams, from the exploratory testing to mob testing. No one talks about mob testing. I think you're really leading the charge on that, and the application of all these experiments you're doing in the modern agile principles that you're applying. I think it's tremendous work. So thank you. Thanks for that, and thanks for coming on the show. And I look forward to the future works you're doing.
Thanks. It was great being here. So I hope this is useful for people, and I'm always available especially on Twitter, for having a conversation.
Yes. So thank you again. If you enjoyed the show, please share with others and subscribe. Thank you for watching.